Morning.
Hi, good morning. Hmm. Okay.
Our part sets up the daily thing from Rabbi. Oh, so where on WhatsApp? Oh, it's on WhatsApp. Yeah, so, so it's on the Safra one Mishnah day. What's that? Solomon Barnatan. Is that the Shlomo that sits in the back?
Oh, you know what? No, I think that's actually there's a student from the Hazak organization that
So he must record it on his phone and send whatever.
I don't know how to do it. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Okay, so we left off last week in the bottom of 20b. We're discussing the Mishnah's list of wicks and oils that you're not allowed to use to light lights on Shabbos. So I guess we'll start again from the two dots, about 4 lines in the bottom. Below bezefes, you cannot use pitch. So the Mishnah had a list of both wicks and oils, which you cannot use. Zephes, Zifta, Shava, Kirusa. Remember last time we were trying to first define what the words mean. Here it seems that these two items are pretty self-explanatory. So Zephes is Zifta, it's pitch, and Shava is Kirusa, Shava is wax. Tana. Adkan psul psilos, mikan va'elech psul shmanim. Until this point in the Mishnah is the discussion of the wicks that you may not use, and going forward, it's the list of oils that you may not use, right? Did I get that right? Yeah. I mean, because there's no, they're not separated into two different Mishnayos. These are the wicks you can't use, these are the oils you can't use. So the Gemara is clarifying that for you. Pshita. So it's obvious. I know which ones are the wicks and which ones are the oils. Meaning, good morning. If I say you can't use seaweed, what I mean is you can't use seaweed as a wick. No one possibly would have thought you could use seaweed as an oil. So why does the Gemara even have to bother giving me this helpful tip? Oh, these are the wicks and these are the oils. Shava, it's trichale. Wax is the problem. Wax is where I need help. Mahu de tema, right? Because is wax the fuel or is wax the wick? I imagine, yeah. Shava et strichale, mahu de tema, I might have said. Lipsilos nami lo chazia, you can't use it as a wick. Kamash balan, that's why the Bryce of the Tana was saying Shava, wax, is in the list of bad oils, but it's not on the list of bad wicks. You may use wax as a wick. Now, what in the world does that mean? So Rashi and the majority of the Rishonim say that it's referring to our candles. Wax, not as an actual wick, but wax tightly attached to the wick is a permitted fuel, is a permitted source of energy. So whereas you can't use wax as the oil um, not attached to the actual wick, not attached to the cotton or whatever you're using, but if it's completely surrounding the wick, like we have in our candles, that would be okay. So when the Gemara says wax is in the list of forbidden oils, but it's not on the list of forbidden wicks, what we really mean is it is okay to use as the oil, as the source, as long as it's attached to the wick. So it's not exactly, if you're literally following the words of the Gemara, that's not exactly what it says. It says you can't use it as the oil, but you could use it as the wick, sort of like what you said. If you somehow lit it on fire and put it in a cup of oil, that would be okay. And that's how Tosfos quotes that that's how the B'nai Narvona, the sages of Narbonne in south of France, which I don't know if at the time of the Muslim conquest it was part of Spain, because I know it was conquered by the Muslims as they were heading north. So I don't know when these sages are talking, but
But they're born in France 1,000 years after.
yeah. I'm talking about in the Rishonim, meaning the Gemara doesn't mention anything. Yeah. So they actually say that our candles that we use is no good because you're using wax as the fuel, and wax is on the list of forbidden oils. Rashi and the majority of the Rishonim, they interpret our Gemara to be saying what I just said, that it's only not allowed if it's separated from the wick, but if it's attached to the wick, meaning what was the whole issue with some of these uh, oils that you can't use? Because they're not going to be drawn up into the wick sufficiently to create a nice flame, and you're going to end up, it'll be flickering, it'll be jumping around, and you'll end up tilting the cup and violating Shabbos. If the wax is surrounding the wick, then you have no problem of the wick drawing this fuel up from the bottom of the cup. It's all the way up to the top of the wick. You have no issue because it's tightly wound around the wick. Okay. Oh, by the way, as you had asked the question, I was thinking about on the train home, why um, lighting Shabbos candles is not in the category of pursuing Nisa, or that perhaps it is, and that's why we find that we're so strict that you have to go beg for it. So I realize this touches on a larger subject, which is that if you go through a lot of the mitzvahs in the Torah, you'll find that many of them are Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. Like we say in Kiddush, even Shabbos is Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, but Tefillin is Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim. Um, you know, don't mistreat your employees. Remember you were slaves in the land of Egypt. Things like that. So Sukkot, how about Sukkot? Sukkot commemorates that when we were leaving Mitzrayim, Hashem protected us in Sukkot, either actual booths or the clouds of glory. So Tosfos asks, why are women exempt from the mitzvah of Sukkah? Is it not a mitzvah of Persume Nisa, where we find that there's an exception to the exemption of women from time-bound mitzvahs. So normally the rule is that women don't have to observe positive mitzvahs that are time-bound, like tzitzis and tefillin and shema, sukkah and lulav, shofar. Tosfos asks, but which time-bound mitzvahs do they have to observe? So Kiddush, I think we said last time, is part of the dual nature of every Shabbos and Yom Tov, which is that once you have to observe the negative, you have to observe the prohibitions against malacha, then you have to observe the positive, because God said shamar v'zachar b'dibur echad, together as one word. But the Gemara says the three exceptions are Hanukkah candles, as we're about to learn in another page or two, reading the Megillah, and 4 cups of wine, Pesach. So Kiddush is not, Kiddush is part of observing Yom Tov. So technically they can make Kiddush inside the house. They don't have to hear it in the sukkah. If they want to join you, then they'll have to be in the sukkah, right? So, but they don't have to sit in the sukkah. Right, exactly, right. Or when you drive through Williamsburg and you see these tiny balconies with all the sukkahs on them, there's no way they could put the family in that little tiny balcony. So all the men are right, or all the men are squished into that side, and the women are all in the dining room. So why are those 3 the exceptions? Because the Gemara says Afhain Hayu Ba'oso Hanes. The women were involved in that miracles. So if the Gemara is if the Chachamim instituted a mitzvah like Mikra Megillah or lighting Ner Hanukkah, then it applies to all the people who were saved from that via that miracle. So Tosfos asks, well, didn't the women benefit from the sukkos that Hashem made leaving Mitzrayim. So if we sit in the sukkah to commemorate the miracle of God's protection in the wilderness, don't they have to observe that as well? So uh, uh, I don't remember what Tosfos says. Some of the commentaries say that there's a very basic distinction, which is that one's from the Rabbanon, one's from the Torah. The mitzvos that we institute, so we have the authority to say we're making this mitzvah for all those to whom the miracle occurred, including women. But when the Torah says there's a mitzvah, you can't really impute God's reason for the mitzvah. You can't really say, well, since God said this, and to my understanding, it's because of A, B, and C, therefore, it should also apply to other people who normally would be exempt. Meaning, once you're dealing with mitzvahs in the Torah, until it says so, you probably shouldn't assume. Probably shouldn't be making assumptions. The Sam Sofer or Rabbi Soloveitchik used to say that the difference is that the only time we say that women have to keep the time-bound mitzvos is when the mitzvah itself is for the how should I say it? The performance of the mitzvah itself is the publicization of the miracle. A mitzvah of tefillin is a mitzvah to take parts of the Torah, wrap them on your head and your arm. It is also a zecher l'tzias Mitzrayim. But is that the nature of the mitzvah itself? Is that what I am doing? I am remembering Egypt? No, you're putting on tefillin. One of the many things, one of the many reasons, or one of the many ideas involved in mitzvah tefillin is to commemorate Yetzias Mitzrayim. But that's not what I am doing. When I light the candle, which was the object of the miracle itself, that's what I'm doing in a public space, in the window or whatever, near the door. What I'm doing is I'm publicizing the miracle. So then we can say that this is a mitzvah per suminisa. You have to go collect money for it. Women would be obligated, etc. Or the mitzvah of reading the Megillah. That's literally publicizing the miracle. I'm announcing, I'm telling the story. Or I'm attending and telling the story. So that's the mitzvah itself, publicizing the miracle. So then we can say that it applies, that we have these distinctions in halacha that women would be obligated, and perhaps there is no limit to how much money you have to spend in order to do the mitzvah, etc. But a mitzvah like sukkah, where even though it is to commemorate the miracle of the clouds, it's not to publicize the miracle of the clouds. There is no mitzvah to have the sukkah in your front yard instead of in the backyard. There is no mitzvah to invite people over to see your sukkah. There is no mitzvah to make it public. People have retractable roofs. No one knows you have a sukkah. There's no problem with that. The mitzvah itself is internal. It's personal. It's to commemorate, maybe to thank Hashem or whatever it is, but it's not to publicize. It's not outwardly focused, and therefore women are not obligated. Anyway, I was just thinking about that lighting Shabbos candles may actually commemorate or testify to the miracle of creation, but it's not, the nature is not necessarily to publicize the miracle. You don't have to put the Shabbos candles in the window, something like that. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. What else was I going to say? It's interesting. Shabbos, Meshech Chochmah points out, on Shabbos you can't carry unless you make an eruv, which was instituted later by Shlomo HaMelech. On Yom Tov you may. So he reads into that the difference in the nature of Shabbos and Yom Tov, whether it's an internal between you and God type of mitzvah or a social celebration, like between you, the community, and God. So Shabbos, you can't carry without an eruv. So you're not going to be bringing food over to your neighbor. You're not going to be doing as much socializing as you would be doing on Yom Tov. Yes, yes. So that's rabbinic, and what was it about Shabbos that the rabbis sought to change, so to speak, with the institution of an Erev? But at its source in the Torah, Yom Tov you may carry, Shabbos you may not. What is that? He is reading that back into the nature of Shabbos and Yom Tov. What does that tell you about Shabbos and Yom Tov? Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote a little book called Halachic Man, Ish Halacha. And the thesis is that sometimes we think of halacha and then everything else in Judaism, the hashkafa or the outlook or, more philosophy or trying to understand Judaism. His idea was you have to see the philosophy through the halacha. So if you want to know what is prayer, the experience of talking to God, you have to look at all the halachot of tefillah. What does it mean that I have to be standing? What does it mean that I first have to praise him and then request and then thank? What does it mean, et cetera, et cetera? So so Rameir Simcha, the Meshech Chochmah, he's using this method to try to figure out what is Shabbos. Shabbos is not a social as much as Yom Tov. Obviously, you're off from work, so you're going to be doing more socializing than you would be doing in the middle of the week. But okay, anyway, side note. Okay, so that's the deal with wax. At least according to the majority of the Rishonim, according to Rashi, aside from the sages of Narbonne, the candles that we use are okay. The reason why the Tana, the one saying over the Mishnayot, had to say, up until here, that's the list of the wicks we can't use. Going forward, these are the oils we can't use. Why? He had to interrupt the recitation of the Mishnah in order to tell you that, because you might have thought that wax cannot be used if it's surrounding the wick. That's why he's saying the only time you can't use wax is if it's on the bottom of the cup and you have a wick sticking in. But as long as it's surrounding the wick, that should be okay. Okay. Amar Rabbi Bar Avin, Itrana Psulta Dezifta. Itran, which the Mishnah will list later, I think it's a tar or something like that, is the residue of pitch. And Shava, Psulta Dufsha, and wax is the residue of honey, like we mentioned last time, the honeycomb. Why do I care? Top of 21a, Lamai Nafkamina. Why do I care where it comes from? Lemekach Umemkar, for commerce. If someone says, I want to buy wax from you, what are you obligated to give him? You could just give him the honeycomb and you don't have to process it any further. That is the legal definition of wax, and you don't have to process it more than that. Okay. Tana Rabban. The rabbis taught, Kol elu sha'amru ein madlikin ben Shabbos, all of the items that the rabbi said you can't light with on Shabbos. Aval osin mehen madura, but you may make a torch or a bonfire out of these materials. Bein lehischamim connecta, whether you're using it to warm yourself, bein lehishtamesh la'ora, or whether you're using it for the light, bein al gabe karka, bein al gabe kira, whether you light this torch or bonfire directly on the ground or you light it on the stove. That's all fine. The problem is only when you're making one little wick for one little candle. So then you can't use the seaweed or whatever it is. But if you're making in such quantity that you're making a torch or a bonfire, then we're not afraid of it going out because of the volume, and we're not afraid that you're going to play around and violate Shabbos by burning something which is not otherwise burning. Okay. It's interesting, this top Tosfos here in 21a, he says, why, when it comes to the wax and the pitch, the tar and the wax, did we say, well, why are you telling us? L'may nafkamina. And, and the Gemara says, oh, for commerce, that if someone buys wax, you just have to give them the honeycomb. The whole Gemara from the beginning of the chapter was defining all the terms that were in the Mishnah. What is the virokash al pnei hamayim? Is it the seaweed? Is it the moss? And all of a sudden, when we are forthcoming with this information and we say that the tar is the residue of the pitch and the wax is the residue of the honey, Then we say, oh, well, why are you bothering to tell us? Why do I care? And the answer is for commerce. So Tosa says it must be that those two items were so well known that it needn't have been said. Meaning the other items of the Mishnah, nobody knows what they are. They're these ancient words from Mishnaic Hebrew. So the Gemara has to define all the terms. But when it comes to these two, these two are apparently are obvious, and therefore we're bothered by why you're telling us in the first place. And the answer to that is because of commerce. Okay. Next, the low b'shemen kik. One of the oils that the Mishnah said you can't use is called shemen kik. So I think when we were learning the Mishnah, I translated it as cottonseed oil, but here the Gemara has two other opinions. My shemen kik. What is shemen kik that you may not use on Shabbos? Amar Shmuel, sha'altinu l'chol nechose yama. I asked all of the sailors that I know, v'amruli, and they told me, of echad yesh b'krakei hayam. There is a bird in the islands of the sea. The kik shmo, the name of the bird is kik, and you can't use the oils of that bird. That's what it's referring to. Okay. Rav Yitzchak Breith Rav Yehuda Amar, Rav Yitzchak, the son of Rav Yehuda, said, Mishcha de Kaza. That's what I had said in the Mishnah, the cottonseed oil. Reish Lakish Amar, Kikayon de Yona. It's a reference of the Kikayon tree that Jonah had in the book of Jonah, right? He's sitting there to watch what's going to happen to the city of Nineveh, and the sun is there, and God has this tree grow, and it's very leafy, it's very shady, and he enjoys it very much. And then God kills the tree, and Jonah's very disturbed. And Hashem says, you're disturbed over this one little tree. I'm disturbed over my whole city of Nineveh. So the Kikayon of Jonah, you can't use. Where do you get the? So I guess there's some sort of sap or oils that come out of this kikayon tree, and that's what the Mishnah is referring to by shemen. You know, it's a shorthand. The nickname of the kikayon was kik, and you can't use the oil that comes from the kikayon tree for candles on Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Chana says, I saw this kind of tree. I saw kikayon diona, v'litzlo liva dame, right? I guess it wasn't that common. And he says, I saw one, and it's comparable to our tree, which they called the tzluliva. Umid paske rave, where does it grow? It grows by the water in the swamps. Val pum chanusa madlan yose, and people would put it outside their storefronts to create shade. It was like an awning. It also gave a good scent. Umi partsi dohi avdi mishcha, from the seeds you can make oil. Uba'an pohi naichan kol briche de marava, and in its shade, all the sick of the land of Israel would lie. Which we know from the story of Yonah that its shade was very helpful. Okay, fine. So again, three opinions in the Gemara. What is Shem and Kik in the Mishnah? Either the oil from the bird called Kik, or cottonseed oil, or oil from the kikayon tree of Yonah. Next, Amar Rava, Silo Sha'amar Chachamim Emed Liknim Shabbos. The wicks that the Chachamim said we may not use on Shabbos. Why? Mipnei Shaha'ur Misachseches Bahen. Because the light is Misachseches. What does that mean? So Rashi gives you two options. It either means that it jumps around, it goes up and down, it flickers, it's not constant, or it doesn't allow oil to get inside. I guess the outside of the wick is too coarse, so too dry, and doesn't allow the oil in. In one of the rules of shchita, of ritual slaughter, so the knife cannot be misachseches. It's the same term, meaning the knife can't have ridges. It can't. So misachseches means it can't go up and down. So it's the same thing here. The flame in these bad wicks, it goes up and down, and it doesn't stay constantly lit. Now, again, the Mishnah So what does he say? He says, why can't you use these wicks after a whole page of telling you what these wicks are? Why can't you use the wicks? Because the flame flickers. And therefore what? So I've been telling you this whole time what Rashi said, and Shema Yate, you may come to tilt the candle and violate the malacha of Havara. You violate the malacha of lighting, kindling a flame on Shabbos. Others say, the Rambam says, if it's flickering, you're going to leave. Meaning the issue is not so much violating the 39 malachos. The issue is that you're going to have a substandard candle for your Shabbos lights. You're supposed to have a candle on your table or whatever near where you're eating. If it's flickering, it's annoying, and you're going to walk out and leave, and you're going to abandon your Shabbos meal, and you're not going to, honor Shabbos properly. What's the difference between these two explanations? One is Rashi says we're afraid of you coming to violate malacha. The Rambam says it's because we're afraid you're going to leave and not fulfill the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos. The difference is, what if I have let's say we have plenty of electric lights. Will I bother? I don't care if it's a flickering candle. I barely even notice the candle. Why do I care if there's a flickering candle? I'm not going to leave my table. Then everyone will be happy. The Rambam would be happy because you're not going to leave. Rashi would say, well, Rashi might even not care. I don't know. Rashi might say, if the flickering is bothering you, then you may tilt the candle. The Rambam would say, you have plenty of light for your meal. You're not going to leave. Or what if I have 10 candles? I don't know. Some people light one for all the children. Some people light all sorts of candles. There are people who have been lighting for different hostages, light an extra candle on Friday night. So what if I have, I don't know, 7 candles, and one of them, I only have 6 good wicks. Then I have to take a little seaweed and make a 7th. So according to Rashi, again, that would be a problem because I may come to tilt it. According to the Rambam, you have plenty of light for your meal. You're not going to leave. You have 6 other candles. So one is flickering, so you don't get good light from that flickering one. But that would be okay. Anyway, I think the Chavetz Chaim, in the Biur Halacha, he says that might be the difference between these two approaches. But it's interesting. The Gemara says, the Gemara finally gets to the why. Why can't you light with them? Because the flame jumps. And therefore, the Gemara doesn't finish the thought. So Rashi says, oh, and therefore you may come to violate the malacha, and the Rambam says you may come to leave. Okay, we'll see when it comes to later. The Gemara will apply this list to other mitzvos where we use flame, like in lighting the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash or lighting Hanukkah candles. Do these prohibitions apply to those two mitzvahs? So we'll have to see if either Rashi or the Rambam fits better once we start applying them to Hanukkah, to the Beis Hamikdash, things like that. Okay. So again, you can't use the wicks because the fire is jumping, meaning the fire is flickering, and therefore, right. And shmanim shamar chachamim ein madlikin behen. The oils that the chachamim said you can't use, mipnei she'ein nimshachin achar hapsila. Again, because the oil does not get drawn up into the wick. Okay. Ba'amine Abaye me Rabba. Abaye asked Rabba the following question: Shmanim she'amru chachamim ein madlikin b'hem Shabbos. The oils which the rabbi said you may not light with on Shabbos. Mahu she'yitein letochan shemen kolshehu v'yadlik. What if I pour a little of the good oil? I have a tiny amount of olive oil. I have a whole bunch of shemen kik, the oil from the kayon tree or something like that. So can I pour out cups of the bad oil and then, kosher it, so to speak, by pouring in a little good oil? What would be the logic for that? Maybe, Rashi suggests, the little bit of good oil can serve as a conduit that will go up the wick, and maybe it will draw some of the bad oil up with it. And then I don't have to be worried about the bad oils. Mi gazrinan dilma asi la'adluke be'enayu olo. What's the question? It seems that to do that, to put the good oil, to mix a little bit of good oil in with the bad oil, that would be fine. The problem is my kids see me lighting with the cottonseed oil, and next they don't know that I poured in a little droplet of olive oil into the cup to mix with the cottonseed oil. They're going to think next week oh yeah, mom always lit with cottonseed oil. So I'm going to just light with cottonseed oil. Meaning the question of Abaye is not, is this okay right now for this Shabbat? Yeah, that's fine. As long as you mix in the good oil, that will allow the bad oil to be drawn up the wick, and that's okay. The problem is mi gazrinan. Uh, did the rabbis make a gzeira? Did they make a fence in order to protect this problem, whatever the problem is, of using bad oils for candles Friday night? Did they say, and you can't use the bad oils even if you mix in good oils because we're afraid that someone will see you using the bad oil and think that that's an okay oil to use? Mi gazrinan dilma asid la'adlika beinayu olo. Did the Chachamim make a fence? Did they make a gzera on the fear that people may use the bad oils on their own without mixing in the good oils, or did they not? Amar lay. So Rabbah answered Abaye, Ein madlikin, don't light this candle, don't light this nair with the bad oil and some good oil mixed in. My timeout, like you said, lafisha ein madlikin, because we can't light with any of it. Therefore, because you can't light with using the bad oils entirely. Therefore, you can't use the bad oils at all because we're afraid that people may come to use the bad oils on their own. Okay. Esve, I'll ask you a question, Rabbah, on what you just told me. You just told me that I cannot use any bad oil, even if it's mixed with the good oil. I'll ask you a question for the following brisa. Karach davar shemadlikin bo al davar she'ein madlikin bo. Ein madlikin bo. If I wrap something which I may use around something which I may not use, and I put them both in the cup, I may not light that wick. So I have a bad wick, and then I wrap around the bad wick. Let's say, I don't know, we have, what are some of the bad wicks? Let's say the seaweed. That's the example I've been using. So we have seaweed, and I use cotton to wrap around the seaweed. Is that a good wick for Friday night? No. Reb Shimon Gamliel said, "What do you mean? Shall base Abba hayu karchen psilal gabe egos umadlikin?" In my father's house, Rabban Gamliel, number one Jew, Nasi of the Jewish people, at home we would wrap the egos, a nut, with good material for wicks, and we'd put that in the cup with the oil, and we would light. So you see that you can wrap an item that you may not use with an item that you may use and put it in the cup. That's the question. How is this a question of what Abaye said? Again, to recap, Abaye asked Rabbah a question. Can I mix some good oil into the bad oil? Will that solve the problem? And do we say that people will see me using the bad oil and they'll use the bad oil next week without mixing in any good oil? That was the question. Rabbah said, you may not use any bad oil, even if you put in the good oil, because people will make a mistake. Abaye asks from the following brisa about, not about oils, but about the wicks. Can I wrap a forbidden wick, a permitted wick, around a forbidden wick and use that for Friday night? The Tanakama, the assumed position, the unnamed position in the brisa says no. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says yes. That's what we used to do at home. That we used to wrap walnuts with, I don't know, cotton or something, and we would use that as our wicks for Shabbos. Right? Abaye is using this proof text, this source, as brisa, as a question on what Rabbah had told him about mixing good oils and bad oils. Why? Because the common denominator between the two cases is that you cannot you cannot make good that which was not good before. You cannot mix two items, an item from the bad list in the Mishnah with another good item. Yeah.
It's just for appearance's sake. It seems like it would be okay if you're wrapping the good around.
You mean because no one will see it? No one will see the one? Oh, you mean because they're going to see the good one?
Yeah.
Ah. I hear. Interesting. Hmm. Right. I guess the issue is you yourself, wrap it. Can I wrap the walnut with the cotton? Yeah, sure. Okay. Maybe next week I'll end up using the walnut itself. I don't know. It's a good point. Um, so Abaya's questioning Rabbah from this brisa. The brisa had two opinions. Which one is he asking from? Right? The Tanakama, the assumed position, the unnamed position in the brisa, said you may not use two items, one from the bad list, one from the good list. Presumably, he's asking on Rabbah from that opinion, from the opinion of the Tanakama. But he's missing what Reb Shimon Gamliel said, which was that we would, meaning again, Rabbah had said you cannot put the good oil into the bad oil, you cannot make it kosher that way. Abaya then cites a brisa where there are two opinions about whether you can mix good and bad wicks. The Tanakama, the assumed position was that you may not, which seems to fall in line with what Rabbah said, that you cannot mix the good and the bad oil. Then Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Dad's house, we would wrap the walnut in the cotton. So you can mix two items, one from the approved list, one from the non-approved list. So which one is he asking from? You're presenting two opinions, one that agrees with me, one that disagrees with me, and you're asking this as a question. Amarle, Ademosvis le mid Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Sayinu mid Tanakama. You're asking on my position from what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said. Oh, you see, you can use the walnut wrapped with cotton to light the Shabbos candles. So why are you telling me that I can't mix the good oil with the bad oil? Hey, you're burying the lead. The Tanakama said that you cannot. And the Tanakama, that's in line with what I said. So you think you're asking me a question. In fact, you're supporting my position. No, hello, Kasha. This is an important principle. Maisa Rav. These were not two equal opinions. The first opinion, the assumed opinion in the Brisa, was the Tanakama. That was an opinion, a logical thought, a distillation of the halachic sources to one opinion. You may not use good wicks mixed with bad wicks. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, he doesn't say, I disagree. I argue from the following sources. He says, I don't know what to tell you. My father, Rabbi Gamliel, he would wrap the walnut in the cotton. So I don't know, what your sources are. I don't know what your arguments are. I just know that it's okay because my father did everything right. So they're not arguing on the same page, right? They're using different, one's using a Maaseh Rav, story of the rabbi, literally, and one is using logic. Which one trumps the other? You say different schools of thought. So he's saying, right, Rabbi is asking from this brisa, you see that you're wrong, Rabbi. You see that you may use two items, one from the approved list, one from the non-approved list. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon Gamliel said that at Rabbi Gamliel's house, they would wrap the walnut with the cotton. But you're missing the fact that Tanakama agreed with me. No, come on. I was asking you from the Maaseh Rav, from the fact that Rabbi Gamliel himself used this item. That's a discussion for a different time. Dr. Chaim Soloveitchik wrote an important article, Rupture and Reconstruction, about how Jewish practice changed, especially in Ashkenazi communities after the Holocaust, where it became more book learning and book paskening, book reasoning and ruling instead of the mimetic tradition. This is what I saw at home, because there was no home. We were all, they were all orphans coming out of the DP camps. So I don't know what they did at home. So I just have to consult the books. Once you're consulting the books, well, how do I know which book to follow? There are 15 books, and they all say different things. So you have to try and, mix them all together. So he wrote this major article, which then became a book, about the change in Ashkenazi society from mimetic tradition to book tradition. Okay, see you tomorrow.